Hello?
The PlayStation 4 is one of the most successful consoles of all time, slaying the Xbox One in this supposed war between consoles. A big part of that was Sony realised to nobody's surprise that the best way to sell a video games console is to make video games.
This horror must be made known to the council.
God of War, Spider-Man, Horizon, Ghost of Tsushima, any Naughty Dog game, Sackboy! Pillars of the PS4 platform that will make the console go down in history as one of the more memorable machines. It's not all tits and ass though, as it did take some time for these PS4 exclusives to come out, and other than Bloodborne, which remains one of my favourite games of all time, in the early days we had... Knack? That was until 2015 when development studio Ready at Dawn released their attempt at a console seller, the Order 1886. Teased as a true next-gen story-driven third-person cover-based shooter, it planted the hopes in many PlayStation fans, or at least my mind at least, that this could be Sony's answer to perhaps Xbox's Gears of War. But instead of a futuristic setting with an alien threat, the Order would take on quite a unique premise in that the game would be set in an alternative steampunk London in 1886, with a focus on werewolves or Lycans as the threat.
I can smell you. Fuck.
One other major difference between Gears of War and The Order would be the fact that Gears of War was successful enough to have 4 mainline sequels and a handful of spin-off titles that are still ongoing today, whereas The Order 1886 fell as flat as a piss-stained rug. Doomed before it even began, the Order franchise's success was incepted and slain from the start line like a silver bullet to the proverbial ball bag. Poor marketing following early rumours and eventual reviews confirming the game was only around 5 hours long, the hype surrounding the game turned to ashes. To be fair, the game did supposedly sell around 2 million copies, which is not bad by any means, but let's be honest, this is peanut dust compared to other Sony produced titles, and I guess the voices of hate just couldn't be healed with that money. Produced by Sony as a PS4 exclusive, I think it's fair to say the Order 1886 was perhaps a bit of a gamble to them, as prior to this game, Ready at Dawn had only developed a few titles, most of which were PSP spin-offs such as God of War Ghost of Sparta, Chains of Olympus, and Daxter. Their most successful game was Okami on the PS2, which I hear is pretty good. I've never played it. However, in comparison to these, the Order 1886 was the studio's foot in the door with high-budget new AAA IPs. Looking at their lineup of games since, it seems Ready at Dawn lost some of that trust in having control over large-scale projects, as all of their releases since are a couple of VR games called Lone Echo 1 and 2, which honestly I've never heard of until researching for this video, and a couple of spin-off competitive shooters branching off of those games.
Enough! Tell me why I should not kill you!
Going back to the whole point of this video, I never really gave The Order a chance back in the day, and it's been in my backlog ever since. And I'm a strong believer in trying something out for yourself before slating it, especially if the only criticism is length. I mean, the best time I had of my life only lasted around 23 seconds, and I know for a fact that too was a divisive experience for both parties involved. So the question I posed to myself for my first proper playthrough of The Order 1886, was it as bad as everyone made out? Well, I'm glad you asked. My name is Naj, welcome to the broadcast, and let's take a look. And please click that subscribe button to catch all my upcoming videos, like and comment your thoughts on the game in the comments below. Thanks a bunch. And taking a look is something I did often in this game, not just the high-def breasts, but the overall presentation of this game is quite simply astonishing. Graphics aren't everything. In fact, in many cases, they are my least important factor of what makes a video game great, but I'd also be lying if I said they didn't help, and I think an art style can also make or break your immediate interest in a game, regardless of the graphical fidelity of that art style. But the Order 1886 has both going for it. Bearing in mind this game was released in 2015, The Order is one of the best looking games I have ever played. Taking place in London in an alternative historical period where technology and industry have advanced beyond those times we know, while still keeping a Victorian, primitive, industrial aesthetic, make for a fantastically visually pleasing steampunk setting. Whether it's beauty in the ugliness of the damp, dark streets of the lower class slums and whorehouses of London, or the glistening shine of the corrupt government buildings, the Order has a very photorealistic appearance, one that is amplified by significant lighting and particle effects that give newer games like Red Dead Redemption 2 a run for its money, creating an incredible atmosphere to this lived-in, very real place. The environments are more detailed than the retelling of stories at a teenage girl's slumber party, and it all explodes into a picturesque cinematic movie in a letterbox ratio. The letterbox ratio takes a little getting used to, but honestly it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would once I grew accustomed to it. But then again, I am playing on a 50-inch TV, so things may have been different with fewer inches. Title of your mum's sex tape.
That is the legend.
This goes for the character models also. The actors and motion capture work here are breathtaking. Judging by most games, the ability to create realistic lip syncing with character dialogue seems to be nigh on impossible, but here it is like having a conversation with a well-crafted Waxworks model before realising, shit, I've been speaking to a Waxworks model. Bonkers. It sounds as good as it looks too, with sporadic moments of operatic soundtracks and great voice acting with impactful and detailed environmental sounds.
Search the archives. Look for manifests, bills of lading, requisition orders. Anything that might link the company to the half-breed shipments.
How are we supposed to look through all this?
Guard neutralized!
On the note of sound though, I did find the 3D audio was a little off. At points the voice of the main character Galahad would sound like he was to the right or in the distance, but as the central character at all times under player control, his voice should have been central. It wasn't a constant problem, but it occurred enough for me to bring it up as it did take me out of the zone a couple of times. Honestly though, as far as video games go, it is an incredible artistic achievement as a whole presentational package. That is a massive shame everything else the Order 1886 has to offer is so disappointing it actually hurts. Why does it hurt? Well, it's like being served a golden crusted puff pastry pie to find it's filled with nothing but nothing.
Landlord! A drink! A drink, goddammit you!
Our story stars Grayson, appointed Sir Galahad of the Knights of the Round Table, more commonly known in this world as the Order. Formed centuries ago by King Arthur with the intention for a band of knights to protect England against half-breeds. Evolution's attempt at splitting away from the human form, creating Lycans. The Order have battled to keep the threat of these monstrous creatures at bay. Taking place in 1886, Galahad and his team of 4, including Sir Percival, Lady Ingrid and Marquis, take on the mission of investigating the recent rise of half-breeds in London, which so happens to be happening alongside a rebel insurgency against the government. With a James Bond-like Q character, the Order are equipped with state-of-the-art scientific weaponry and gadgets, but perhaps the biggest boon of all for our agents of the Order is extended life. Grayson being around 400 years old due to a drinkable mysterious substance called black water, found in none other than the Holy Grail itself, which was found by the original knights led by King Arthur and has since been used by each generation of Knights of the Order. Our particular little story is told for the majority through a flashback as Galahad's journey starts as a prisoner of the Order for crimes we are currently unaware of, before he jumps into the River Thames claiming he is already a dead man, as we are taken back months to where it all begins.
You have betrayed our order! No one may escape the penalty!
You forget, Lord Chancellor. I'm as good as dead already.
Galahad!
Sounds pretty exciting, right? May I present to you the first 30 minutes of the game?
Rendezvous at the United India House with Igraine and Lafayette and contain the threat. Do you have it in sight?
Right in front of me. morning.
The gameplay of The Order is where the game's frustrating inconsistencies are most potent, as it attempts to be two types of game. A third-person cover-based shooter and an interactive narrative walking simulator, think Until Dawn or more recently, The Quarry. Yet instead of tying these two genres together in a compelling way, they are constantly tripping over each other, making the game incredibly poorly paced. Tell you the truth, I don't actually get the impression the latter of the two genres was as intentionally prominent as it ended up being. Let me tell you why. QuickTime events.
On your mark.
Can't even tell we're airborne when I'm back in the hold.
2,
But here, all those...
1.
Since the times of Resident Evil 4, these events have been considered cheap ways out of gameplay to instead give the player the impression they are in control. I don't have a problem with QuickTime events as a whole, if used sparingly and meaningfully, but The Order does feel very cheap as they are so frequent that I was grinding my teeth within the first hour of the game. Where interactive narrative games like Until Dawn get these right are in the choices. This then gives the player the feeling they are still contributing to the plot and character actions, even though we are simply mashing X like an avocado. However, in The Order, we are the very definition of a couch potato. As I said, cutscenes are well presented and voice acted, however they do come to a tedious slog with these button prompts that it breaks the flow, destroying any sense of atmosphere and immersion at times. I would have much rather, obviously, played out the events in actual gameplay, but other than that I would have actually preferred just to watch a good old cutscene. There are no character choices or options for different approaches, creating possibilities for alternative cutscenes or multiple playthroughs. The most exciting it gets is holding down triangle to reach for a key. This is not giving the player a creative input into the story, it is simply a reminder that we are playing a game and not watching a movie, when in reality these moments aren't playing a game at all. Just like when you're watching a video on your phone and you tap the screen to prevent it from locking. That doesn't make it gameplay. Now this also applies in the game's exploration and level design. What is worse than a game being too short? A short game that feels like a bloody eternity. The Order took me just shy of 6 hours to finish, but somehow it felt more like 16. That somehow was due to the pacing and choppiness of gameplay. Level to level, I was walking around different locations throughout London. The city streets, underground stations, an airship, dockyards, catacombs, buildings. A bit of variety as it felt like I was on some ride through this historical attraction. One of the highlights for me was the inclusion of real life events, places and people. Westminster, talking about Portsmouth Docks, which is literally where I'm from, Jack the Ripper, killings being reported and everyone running scared, Lord Hastings and Parliament. The game includes real history and morphs it into a supernatural alternative reality within the world created in the game.
How could I have known he was the Ripper? He was just another bloke.
He killed another one last night.
I didn't know.
Leave her be, monsieur.
I didn't know.
Don't worry. You're safe now.
It was fascinating for me to see this, being so familiar with London and England, but like a school teacher who would much rather just wheel out a 15-inch TV for some boring-ass documentary you can't see from the back of the classroom, the class in session is just so very dull. Traversing from objective to objective on a straight and narrow path cannot be deviated from, and the problem with this is the game tells you at what speed. The walking in this game is slower than a stationary tortoise, which is very, very slow. At times you cannot run or even walk with purpose, but what makes this so annoying is there is nothing to really look at. Style over substance is well in play here, and there is never any real sense of urgency and everything just takes its sweet ass time. Walking, interacting with objects, quick time events popping up and the prompting themselves, nothing is ever in a rush. So when half of the gameplay is a tedious bore, I can't help but think the 6-hour runtime was extended by putting in place hand-holding tactics that prevent the player from speeding through half of the game. It would have been half the length had I had control of my movement speed. To pad out the experience, there are also collectibles in the game that have story relevance and or historical lore, or are just objects within the world. Wow, we can turn our wrists to look at them. The collectibles are irrelevant minus a few, and the ones that would have had some sort of interest from me, you can't even read. I mean, look at this. How is anyone able to read this comfortably without squinting a few inches from the screen? Even squinting I was unable to read them, and you can't get the text up in a menu like other games, which brought me to the point of not even trying because it was more painful than it was worth to get any sort of sense from them. So basically when I was interested in something the game wanted me to collect, the game didn't even want me to read it or observe it. What I did find interesting, however, was the combat, but like everything else, the game attempts to put multiple components together without mastering any of them. Every moment I thought the game was coming into its own, it's one step forward, two steps back. So I'm going to split the combat in two, against humans, which most of your time will be, and then the Lycans, the game's unique oversold selling point, a bit like a bag of Go Large crisps containing 3/4 of air. First off, it's not all bad. The cover shooting combat is pretty good when it lets you get the fuck on with it and gives you the right tools for the job. In which there were 3 levels out of the 16 I felt it accomplished this satisfyingly. You have your role to evade and can take cover on objects using a primary weapon, secondary and throwable. 30 minutes into the game, after a walk through London, multiple cutscenes and exciting wrist movements, we have our first encounter against the rebel insurgency. Equipped with a single shot rifle that has an additional R1 ability to push enemies back with a force, stunning them, the weapons in the game are actually pretty cool. You have your standard stuff, rifles, machine guns, pistols and a shotgun, but it is the advanced weaponry that gives the combat its edge. My personal favourite being the thermite gun. This bad boy sprays out chemicals all over the place. Follow that up with a well placed shot of magnesium, you're setting everything aflame. Good for destroying cover and armoured soldiers, it's a great way of creating chaos on the battlefield. And then we have the induction lance, which was another awesome addition, which uses energy to blast targets to smithereens, auto-locking onto anything in your sights. The environmental damage and the way these weapons tear enemies limb from torso is extremely gratifying to play around with. I mean, look at the mess I made. Level 8 and 15, the Hastings Bridge and Catacombs respectively, allowed me to use these weapons as I pleased. Using various points of cover to advance through the levels, wielding a variety of guns against goons, some wearing armour, some with heavy artillery. The shotgun guys that just run at you are brutal and killed me off a few times. I had to retreat and plan my attack, keeping the linear format but done well like the games we love from the genre. It was these moments that made me appreciate the game, and also helped me understand what the Order could have been had this been its focus all along. Except for the 2 exceptions, combat at times was as tiresome as everything else, because again, there was no player creativity to it and was so preempted in its design. Only certain cover would work, so only 1 or maybe 2 points I could actually get behind. Enemy programming is thicker than a Cumberland sausage running into my shots, or always being conveniently placed next to a big red explodey barrel. Hey, look at me! Blow me up as I stand next to this well placed inconvenience for me. Cover-based shooters shouldn't just be about sitting behind one point of cover, popping out when they are reloading. We are fighting a rebellion after all, not at a fairground shooting plastic ducks for overpriced stuffed toys. Enemies do not flank you, nor is there much room for manoeuvrability to flank them. A great example of this is the 4 sniper sections in the game, in which there is just one window to shoot from. Changing positions to get the upper hand on the enemy like a good sniper isn't possible. The game had a very set way to complete most combat encounters, that the gameplay didn't match the creative aesthetic with the weapons and gadgets around us. When you're not fighting enemies from the front, we are taking them from behind in stealth sections, which, guess what? Fucking terrible. Equipped with a pretty sweet knife, we creep behind enemies and with the press of a button we take them out. These sections are insta-death though, so if you are seen, it's game over. Which wouldn't be so bad if there were other tools and tactics at our disposal for these sections, but with the camera fighting against us, there are some pretty cheap, annoying deaths. In a cover shooter, we can't take cover against walls if there is not a gun in our hand. No throwables or methods of distraction, so I was left just crouching like I was taking a shit behind a bush, waiting for the enemy patrol to do its thing. It's like different sections from different games have just been glued together in the editing room. Now the final and probably most disappointing part of all this are the Lycan fights. First appearing in Chapter 3, we go into the depths of the underground, a sequence which has great horror potential, the atmosphere, something the game has many times. We search through these tunnels for a Lycan threat. These freaky half-man, half-dog looking beasts are nightmare fuel in both their appearance and combat mechanics. Coming at me from all directions, I had to roll out of the way with a button prompt followed by a couple of shots. These fluffy fellas are euthanized by a final stab of the knife before shriveling back to their human form. They are fast and will back you into a corner, and it was a pretty intense first counter, I must say, setting up the main threat of the game. Yet, they really are not. We face off against these not even a half a dozen times, and the encounter is exactly the same each time. Roll, shoot. Roll, shoot, roll, shoot, roll, shoot. Once you mastered this, they are easy to evade and kill, and what should be the horror element of the game loses its appeal and threat very quickly. And don't even get me started on the friggin' elders. Pure breeds, powerful, aggressive, towering over Galahad like a Great Dane looking down on a little Shih Tzu. I reduced to nothing but a goddamn quick time event knife fight. Two occasions we come across these, one early on and, spoiler alert, another for the final boss of the game. Despite being different elders, the fight is exactly the same. The end of the game takes place in the lab where all of the scientific weapons are made for the Order. Yet none of this is taken into account during the fight. Nothing but a backdrop when this could have been implemented into the fight incredibly well to give us an interesting and intense battle. This would have been awesome, going around the lab picking up different equipment and weapons to fight this huge Elder, but instead we get again right stick up, slash, right stick, right, large slash. If this is what it takes to take out an Elder, then why the fuck does the Order exist in the first place? A stellar drinking drunk could have done this just as well. It's flipping terrible. And the story? Incredible setup, characters, atmosphere. The only thing as epic as this is its predictability. It had mystery, the real life history that was at the centre. I really enjoyed that, but I'm not trying to be big-headed when I say I guessed pretty much every "wow, really?" moment before it even happened. And then to just end on a whimper of a classic hero on the run for his crimes we didn't commit ending. With, oh yeah, there's a rebellion. Guess what? We joined the rebellion. Oh, guess what? Your boss is the bad guy. Woo! I said earlier, the Order 1886 is very much one step forward, two steps back. For every pro, there are multiple cons, and you know what? You're gonna laugh. I would flippin' love to see a sequel. Huh? Yeah, I really would. Because what I have taken away from my time with the Order is it was a fantastic idea full of great potential, but executed in an unfocused, confusing way. Is it an interactive movie? Is it a shooter? Is it horror? It tries to be all of these things, and this is where the problems I have with it come together. It goes back and forth from idea to idea, creating a complete minefield of a scattered pace, and none of the ideas are executed particularly well. I think Ready at Dawn were so in over their heads and were so focused on making the whole experience a cinematic one, the design decisions ended up making it the opposite many times. In the end of the game, before the final boss, let me tell you, I had such a great time because it was focused on good level design, combat and suspense. When it threw everything at me and I was able to actually be in control of it, this is what I wanted from the game, and it was going on for a good 20 minutes before it, ended. So yeah, this is probably PlayStation's biggest misfire when it comes to its exclusives for the PS4. But the gun can be reloaded. Over the last year, Ready at Dawn were acquired by Facebook. But Sony owns the rights to the franchise, which were recently renewed last year. Pretty interesting. Maybe Sony sees the potential in this franchise still, and it might just be up to another developer to give us the game it so desperately needs and has the potential for. Perhaps Corey is in the house. Nah, it must be my bedtime. Good night.